Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Picture this. It's a gray spring day in 2004. A father finally decides to share a secret he's been carrying for nearly 7 decades. He hands his daughter a musty passport issued in 1935, belonging to an aunt she's never heard of. That moment, that simple exchange of an old document, would unlock a family mystery spanning generations and continents, revealing a Holocaust story that has been deliberately erased from memory. Today on Authors on Mission, we're diving deep into the shadows of family science with Nicola Hanefeld, author of The Unspeakable, Breaking My Family Science Surrounding the Holocaust. More than just a war story, it's a tale about how past lives within us can resonate when we don't know it's even there. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer here at Authors on Mission, and this show is for everyone who believes that the most powerful stories are always the ones that are hidden, or not always be the loudest ones. Sometimes they're whispered across generations, hidden in documents, waiting for somebody brave enough to listen. Nicola's story takes us from the single passport of hers to a complete family reckoning, shows us how one person's determination can uncover the truth behind everything. So, without further ado, Nicola, we're proud to welcome you on to the Authors on Mission podcast.
Lovely to meet you, Danielle.
It's wonderful to meet you as well, and I am so excited to dive in and share this story with everybody listening today. Nicola, I noticed before you actually do have that passport with you today, don't you?
There it is. Yep.
Very cool. Can you share a little bit about what that must have been like? Wow, look at that. It's a piece of history in your hand.
My father's message. And this is his aunt, my great aunt, who looks very similar to my grandfather. So the passport owner, her name is Greta Lanza. And I'd never heard of her. My grandfather and I were very close. He died when I was 22. He was 94 years old. And I had no idea that he had not one sister, but 2 sisters that had been killed by Hitler in the Holocaust. That's what my father shared with me a year before he died in 2005. So he sent this passport to me. I live in the south west of Germany. He lives in just outside London in those days. And he sent it per post, just recounting these facts. There were 5 people that had been murdered in the Holocaust and other people who escaped to Australia, or first to England and then to Australia. And I just stood there trying to digest what this all meant. It was a very stunning moment.
Yeah, that must have been just life-changing to have received that and to hold that document and to know the weight that it carried. What was going through your mind in that moment?
I think it was kind of like a blank, because when something so stunning like that happens, you can't, it's so monumental, the information, that I couldn't digest it. So the first thing was, I think I saw how my great aunt, she looked very similar to my grandfather, and I worked out that she was only a year older than him. And some of the people that he mentioned I had actually heard of. So it was just kind of trying to make sense of the information I'd been given. But I mean, that took 20 years to really understand what the information that he had sent, what it really, really meant. Long years of research.
Yeah, I'm sure. And, ever since then, you really have, I guess, come to understand yourself and your family, especially in the creation of this book. I'm wondering, what that must have been like, kind of rediscovering, in a way, your own identity by rediscovering your family's history as well. I know it must have been years in the making, but you want to share a little bit more about that? I'm sure you were researching before the book came to be, correct?
Yes. So I relatively quickly found online Greta's fate. That was 2004, 2005. And I kept going in and out of this, trying to understand what had happened to all these people. And of course, at the same time, my identity was shifting as well, because I realized, nobody ever spoke about anything, Jews, Holocaust. You never heard anything while I was growing up in London in the 60s and 70s. But when I was about 18, I realized that my father and his parents, my grandparents, were German-speaking Czech Jews. But there was no conversation ever going on. So there's me kind of like 40 years later trying to sort out what had happened, who had not been able to emigrate in time to England. So my grandparents, my father and his sister, my aunt, they arrived in 1939 in England. So yes, it has. There was nothing Jewish about our family in any way. And what had happened is that my grandparents were Jewish, but they, when they fled Czechoslovakia in 1938, first they went to Prague, then they went to Zurich in Switzerland, and there they had themselves christened. They thought that would be easier for them to get into Great Britain. And my father and my aunt, his sister, they were brought up as Catholics. So there was always already then a lot of awareness of the danger of being Jewish. But now here am I, mid-60s, identifying with a Jewish family ancestry that I know nothing about. I know very little about Judaism, and it is a very, very impactful. So I'm learning and letting it all into me, and there's been a lot of sadness as well. Understanding what had happened to these people that were never mentioned. There were no photos of them. Nobody ever spoke about their fate. So yes, it was a long haul.
Right, but there were shadows of them. Like you mentioned, you had heard of some of these people, but you didn't quite make the connection. One thing that I, was reading through was that you had discovered your grandfather actually had a missing half finger, and you touched it as a child. How did this come to be?
Well, his right hand looked like that, not like that. And I remember reaching out and touching it as a child, and he'd pull away very quickly. And I remember,
never asked why, and
I didn't. I learned very, very early to not ask questions. I was the oldest in my family, and I think those children are quite perceptive. And he didn't explain. I didn't ask. And that's why the book is called The Unspeakable, because there was so much unspoken, and the book is about contrasting the unspeakable atrocities of the Nazis and not being able to talk about that in my family. So there's the unspeakable and the unspoken, and the unspoken in my mind became the unspeakable in inverted commas. This is like an entity, one could almost say.
Yeah, definitely. And actually the, Unspeakable is kind of not only the title of your book, but almost a theme that goes throughout it. Because when I was looking through, there's actually, some unpublished writings from the relatives who survived. I think it does share a lot about the quiet side of the Holocaust that we don't hear about. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about that, about the writings in particular.
Sure. That's one of the very surprising, actually astonishing things, that when I started searching, I only just had to kind of scratch the surface of the internet, and all this data would pop out. And my mother had a huge, reasonably huge suitcase that I knew nothing about, where obviously data had been put in throughout the years. So I found from my grandfather had 3 sisters, and the younger sister, she emigrated to England in time. Her name was Irma, and I knew her. She died when I was 7. So she wrote about, in the end of 1943, about when her niece came to England. So that was one source that I could draw upon. My father wrote hundreds of letters when he was away at boarding school. He arrived in 1939 in England, and I found these letters in 2011. His sister, she wrote about returning to Czechoslovakia in 1945. So there's a lot of writing going on. And my grandmother, here's the cover of the book, that makes it a bit easy to understand. This is my maternal grandmother, and this is my father, and this is my aunt. Here's my father as a 6-year-old, and my grandmother. And I didn't know she had a brother. She had a brother called Alfred, and 2022, I put his name into Google, and 1,000 pages came up of an archive in Switzerland that he had put there. And that was another huge source that I could draw upon. So Mariana's, my grandmother's sister-in-law, she was furious and hugely indignant about what was happening to her. And these letters have survived all the years because they were on the run. That family were on the run for 3.5 years in France. And then they illegally entered Switzerland. And the letters about how it was for this family, for her name was Hilda, she was separated from her husband, and the Swiss treated refugees who'd come into the country to save their lives as if they were criminals. And these letters, 29 letters, have survived. And that's also the quiet side of the Holocaust, is you're being persecuted and at the same time treated as if you're a criminal. And it was very restrictive the way Switzerland treated refugees, Jewish refugees. And so that was another source. And then there are also documents showing that a cousin of my father committed suicide. I found that very late on in the research. She was only 19. She came to England. She escaped to England when she was 18, and when she was 19, she committed suicide. And there's actually a newspaper report on her suicide.
Wow, first I'm really sorry to hear about all this, but I'm sure as you were discovering, you must have gone through your own process of, discovering each person, mourning them, and then processing it and putting it into the book. Is that kind of summarize how it went? It's so sad to hear about, but I'm sure after going through it all, it must have been healing.
I don't know if I was mourning them. It was a very interesting question because it was more being overcome by an incredible, never-ending anguish and sadness that it didn't feel like it was mine. So I write in the book about certain sort of shifts in states of consciousness. It was sometimes as if I was catapulted back into that time, but I was still in my present time. It all sounds a bit creepy, but that's just how it was. So I wasn't individually mourning members of my family. It was more this absolutely overbearing and uncontrollable weeping that I went into. So, and I still don't really understand what actually happened, but I can only describe how I experienced it. Don't have to understand everything that happens when you get into this kind of family research.
Yeah, I guess so. It's more so about just, telling their story the best you can based on what we have. And yeah, definitely. And that must have been a relief to you just because, one thing that your book does explore, it quotes how your family was dealt with trauma through forgetting, denying, and suppressing. So it must have been nice to kind of overcome that approach by getting it out into a book.
Yes, it was very, very healing. Originally, I've kept journals. I've always been writing my whole life. And I started my PhD in 2017. I was recently reading my journals from then, and there was already, you can see me plotting out what eventually became the Unspeakable. But in those days, I was calling it standing in the way of the light. And because that is how I felt it was. And I think it shifted to the Unspeakable when I discovered what my father's maternal grandmother, she was 76 when she was transported from Theresienstadt to Treblinka. She was a grandmother, 4 grandchildren, and it's that Unspeakable. That's where the name The Unspeakable turned up. I mean, a granny. I'm a grandmother as well, and I mean, it just summarizes the debauchery and depravery and the hatred that the Nazi regime had to an old. And we don't even know if she survived the journey because Theresienstadt is actually quite a long way from Treblinka in Poland. So Theresienstadt is in Czechoslovakia, or what was left as Czechoslovakia. And Treblinka is way over, like 2 or 3 days train journey away in Poland.
Right, and I guess that's part of the story too, is that you were able to uncover some letters and documents and photographs, but other stuff, unfortunately, you just don't know, and that's crazy to think about. It's a shame we can't kind of just go back and see or ask somebody, but sometimes it's just that's the way it is, and it's amazing that you're able to weave together what you did know and put it into the book. Though that's what really is important. I'd love to transition us a little bit into that writing process then, because like I just said, it does really, beautifully weave together all your memories, historical documents, photographs. So how did you decide on this structure, for example? I'm sure the story could have been told in many different ways. So how this multi-layered narrative structure?
Yes. I mean, there are lots of Holocaust memories out there, there's lots of history out there. And I realized when I'd finished doing my PhD, which is on maternal health, that I'd been using a qualitative research analysis approach called IPA, which stands for Interpretative Phenomenological Analysis. Sounds very complicated, but all it is the focus on lived experience. And I realized that is a possibility for me to interweave my research experience with the facts. So I'm in there, and what often happens in books, that especially history books, the author is kind of, you don't pick up the author, it's sort of a detached narrative. So I am in there, and I think that the resonance that I've heard up till now from people who've read the book, that is what makes it powerful, because it's very easy to follow what was going on during the research. All the shocks and the surprises and the sadness is throughout, it's interwoven into the narrative. But that, as I say, came from doing my PhD in at the University of Hull in England, 2017 to 2021. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can see how all that combines, formulated the book. And it must have been a little bit busy, doing your PhD. It was at the same time while also researching.
No, I finished when I finished my PhD, and then in that summer is when I discovered what had happened to Therese Wilhelm, my maternal great-grandmother. And what it was, obviously, inside me, I was taking the impetus from the PhD and settled down to writing the Unspeakable. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm sure that the PhD and that academic pursuit kind of might have influenced the writing in some way or another. Would you agree on that?
Totally. I was really into the writing zone, because you have to write an awful lot to write a dissertation, and it just, so I shifted from the maternal health arena to the Holocaust, which is a bit
Different
crazy.
Areas.
But it felt very right to do. Yeah, it felt very right to do it. And it was, in the end, I think you mentioned it a while back, it was a very healing, therapeutic process. I'm very glad I did it. And my cousin, who was with me all the time, the whole way, so the daughter of my aunt, her name is Jules, she lives in London. She was with me the whole way, and for her it's also been very, very healing, because she also grew up with the Unspeakable.
That's really amazing that you had almost a team then, someone to collaborate with and bounce ideas off of.
Yeah. And she contributed a lot of data, but above all, I mean, we could weep together on the phone. There was a lot of weeping going on, not talking, really weeping. And we even found the house where my father and our grandparents, they left Czechoslovakia in 1938, and in 2016 we found the house that they had lived in, and it's still out there, and we visited. So that was also incredibly moving. And Jules, she took a little thimble full of ashes of her mum and spread it in the garden, and so it was very, very moving. Yeah, and we shed a lot of tears as well doing that.
Definitely. So it's, incredible to think that you were both able to heal by doing this project together, and also it completed your story a little bit by adding those little details that you might not have realized without working with somebody else. I guess that's something that everybody listening today can draw from and take to heart when they're writing. We think that writing is a solitary thing a lot of the time. You're just sitting alone and typing away, but it is collaborative. You need to run it by, friends, family, a beta reader, an editor, for example. It's a great tip for us all to hold on to, I think.
Yeah, I had a wonderful team of editors. I never felt solitary, because, I mean, when I started crying so much I couldn't write anymore, then I was just on the phone, or, I mean, there was a huge team out there supporting me. It was actually a very, very humanely empathetic process, and how many people realized what I was going through and how everybody responded. So yeah, it was a lot of collaboration going on.
Understood. Yeah, and again, really important that we do have that collaboration. And what was that editing process like then? I've talked to a lot of writers, and every time that we send a manuscript over to our editor, we can either feel, as if we're reshaping it, but I have talked to authors who kind of had disagreements with their editors sometimes. So what was that like for you specifically?
I was just grateful. I mean, I had colleagues, and I mean, there was trust in my editors because we knew each other professionally, but also personally. And it was very rare when I disagreed with any of them. So I highly respected their suggestions, but they were also very, very mindful and empathetic. So I think if I was working with an editor that I didn't know, it might have been different because there was this personal connection there. I think that made it very easy. So I had my first editor in 2022. We started, and then had she's called Leslie Cook. I want to honor her. Hi, Leslie. And then I had a developmental editor in the States. Her name was Ruth Rutberg. And I had the absolute pleasure of meeting Rick Pinar. He's a historian in Prague, but he also is a very capable editor, keen editorial eye. So these were the three editors. And then Amsterdam Publishers, they also had an editor, and his name was Luke Finley. And so he did notice that the manuscript had already had a lot of work done on it. And at one point he did say, lots of people don't like having their work edited, but you have no problems, or something like that. He said, I enjoy editing because I'm very aware that editing raises the quality of the writing. So, and it's also, I was never totally identified with, it's not mine. It was just something that was flowing through me. So I wasn't possessive of the manuscript. I think I could let it go. And it's probably why I think editing is a fantastic process.
Yeah, it definitely is. And not only hones in on what can be improved in the manuscript, but you also, gain some writing skills, meet some incredible people, as you mentioned. And it's all just a beneficial experience. So yeah, that's something, of course, everybody needs when you're writing a book. You need an editor, a second set of eyes on it, and someone with different background and perspective to really elevate it. Yeah.
And I also had the habit myself when I started work on a Monday, editing what I'd done on Friday. I was very mindful of taking breaks. But it's not only I had editors, I like editing as well, because what I noticed is that if you finish writing on Friday and you go back to your text on the Monday, your mind has been working on that text, if you know it or not, and you realize, this sentence is a bit clumsy, or you can make two sentences out of it, or that word is not quite right. And I was very, very aware, probably because I'd done the PhD previously and I had two supervisors giving me that feedback. So I was very into the editing zone and very appreciative of how profitable good editing can be.
Yeah, definitely. And profitable is a good word for it too. Profitable in many different regards, of course, financially, but also, again, what you're learning, who you're meeting with, connecting with. So going along to a little bit more about the book itself, I was wondering if there is any particular chapter that was more challenging to write than others. A moment whether you question maybe the story should remain private. I'm wondering if you'd like to share a little bit about that. Perhaps give us a sneak peek about some of these stories that are incorporated.
The most difficult chapter to write is the one about Greta. When I put her picture, I do make a point of saying her name and again, because as if she's being reinstated. So I planned to, because she was transported from Prague to Theresienstadt in December 1941. Her sister was transported to the Łódź ghetto in October 41. So I had to learn about that. And you can't write about something if you have no knowledge. So 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I planned my day, researched Theresienstadt. And I just wasn't doing what I planned to do. A lot of avoidance behavior going on. And initially I thought it was because it's a horrific and disgusting topic. That was my understanding, cognitive, making sense of why I was not doing what I planned to do. And then I started becoming aware of a strange feeling in my upper chest. And on one morning I woke up and I realized that this is the inherited avoidance strategy that my family, that had obviously been passed on to me, of not addressing what had happened during the Holocaust. And it was like it was really a felt sense, like a veil or a wall or a curtain in me. And I suddenly understood why I'd not been doing what I planned to do. And so I had to get through, and I described that process, getting to the other side of that inherited silent wall within me. So it was not a wall of bricks, but it was definitely still a wall of, I don't know what you would call it, of something, a psychological wall, psychological barrier. And getting onto the other side, that was the most difficult thing. But I described that process, and that kind of, I was really quite a different person by the time I came out on the other side. I felt much more serious and much more prepared to address writing this book, because I was out of the general knowledge Holocaust zone and into the real Holocaust zone, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, and I like the way you described that, the general to the real Holocaust zone. It's you,
Yeah.
you're suddenly finding yourself immersed in a story that you've heard about for years through textbooks and others, and now it's your own lived experience. I see what
Yeah.
you mean by that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And that's something you really emphasize in the book, how it is your lived experience rather than just historical facts. So as a writer, it must have been an interesting experience to take everything you've felt, all of the trauma, all the new feelings, all the new memories, and convert that into memories on the page. I'm wondering if you did have any specific strategies when you were writing, any methods that work better for you than others?
It was always connecting again and again to what is really going on in me. Now, we humans, we can be very intellectual, very brainy, very cognitive, and we can live in that zone and manage our lives. But to write the unspeakable, how I wanted to write it with lived experience, I had to include the emotional side. So it was tuning in and finding words to describe what I was going through. So humans have the power of language, and language symbolizes our experience. But to get this kind of experience down into words, that was the challenging thing. But I never put myself under pressure. I had no deadline or anything. It was just going line for line, day for day, hour for hour, month for month, plowing on with this wonderful team of supporters. And it was always being aware of how important it is to let it all go, because it is horrific, writing about what went on in Auschwitz or Treblinka and the ghettos. And so I had to do a lot of self-care as well. Yeah.
Would you mind speaking a little bit about that? I think that's something that, regardless of the topic we're writing about, some self-care is important, when you're immersing yourself in writing, especially if it's a challenging topic. But regardless, what were some of your favorite self-care routines?
My favorite self-care strategy was the power of not writing. That sounds very contradictory, but I learned very, very much to trust when words. I never sat in front of a screen and didn't know what to write. So if I didn't know what to write, I let it go, did something else, went for a walk, went shopping, rang somebody up, cleaned the windows. So this not writing, I found very, very beneficial to the process of writing, because I could trust that my mind was working out what is the next step. It was letting go was the most important self-care thing. And of course, writers, you can get very hung up typing. You get stress and shoulders and all that kind of stuff. And as a teacher of the Alexander technique, I was not going to give myself neck and back pain. So it was this letting go. It was this non-doing, not forcing myself. If somebody who had been watching me, they say she's so unconcentrated, because I'd be like hopping away from my computer every 10 minutes. But I knew I was still working on what is the next sentence I want to write, even if I wasn't writing that sentence. So that's what I say is the most important thing about writing is not writing.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Sometimes you just need to do something aside from writing, let your brain decompress a little bit. And I love that line you just said, you're writing when you're not writing, because you're right, your brain is recharging, you're thinking.
Yeah.
All of those things.
And it's also being gentle to yourself, especially in this kind of arena, this zone. You've got to be gentle to yourself. It's horrific. You can't put yourself under pressure to write about these horrific things. That's just unhealthy. You're going to have nightmares, aren't you?
No, definitely. You need to make sure you're in the right mind space, a place to, tell the story with as much passion as you can without, hurting yourself, and also just ensuring you're doing justice to the story, because it's also important. It's probably like carefully putting down pieces of, precious materials and being very carefully making sure it's all coming together perfectly. So You got to make sure you're doing your best.
What you're saying now, is resonating with me, because what it is not rushing and trusting that things will come into place without me forcing it. I called it an organic process, and I was very, very trusting of this organic process. It sounds as if it's chaotic, but I think it's just the right and the left brain side of the brain coordinating and working together. And of course, we're all into this logical language, consecutive type of thinking, which writing is, but lived experience involves all levels of my being and not only thought processes.
Yeah, definitely. At all levels of your being, that makes a lot of sense, that it has to be an immersive thing. It's not just your brain, it's your whole body, it's your your spirit, all of that. So
yeah, exactly.
This is some really important stuff for our listeners to know about too. We always talk about how to structure a book, how to market a book, like all of the big picture stuff. But this is another topic that we don't always touch upon, and it's probably more important than anything else. So this is great that we've been able to discuss this a little bit here on the podcast. I'm wondering if you have any little tips in that regard for the audience today. About, I think, keep self-care and so on and so forth.
This thing about writing, researching family history and trauma and the unspeakable and not talking, I think it's very important to be aware of why people don't talk about certain things. And when I got into the zone, I thought, everybody's going to be so fascinated and interested, and they want to give me the next chapter you've written. I read, and that's not what happened. So my cousin was with me, but I've got 2 younger brothers, and my mother is still out there, and they've got children and my own children. And this whole unspeakable thing that had carried through the decades was still resonating with them, although I had decided with my cousin to get out of that zone. So what I'm talking about now is, don't put your expectations too high if you do get into working in memoir, that people are going to be clapping their hands and saying, well done you. There is a reason why people don't talk about certain things.
Was that something you were prepared for also, kind of you just want to get the story across, not necessarily for applause? I'm sure you've got a lot of positive feedback, though, that being said.
Yeah, since the book is only 4 weeks old, and there's been some absolutely beautiful reviews out there. I mean, I've been pretty overwhelmed by the positive reaction.
Yeah, I mean, after 2 decades of writing it, all this careful planning, I didn't realize that there was actually, I knew it was this year that it was published. I didn't realize 4 weeks ago. That's even sooner too. So.
Yeah, so the book is only a month old.
It's only a little baby.
I wasn't writing for 2 decades. I was researching for 2 decades. Yeah, I started writing in 2021, and my first editor, she was about a year later. She started looking at chapters with me. So I think the first writing cycle for the first manuscript draft was like 1 3/4 of a year I needed. Yeah.
Understood. Got it. Yeah, it's a long process, but we talked about how important it is to make sure we're immersed in every step of that process to get the best results. So, understood. And of course, we should all be checking out the book. This is a very powerful story, but perhaps people might want to get in touch with you or follow along with your story, maybe stay up to date with more updates. What's the best way they can reach you?
I have a website, and my website is really weird. The website is 25 years old, and it's called www.speakde, because I live in Germany, SPEEK, and that stands for the work I was doing as an Alexander Technique teacher, to do with speech and presenting and efficiency and ergonomics and communication. But Unspeakde is the unspeakable, which I mean, how things came together. On Unspeakde, there is a menu point called the Unspeakable, and there's all the information about the book on there.
Oh, perfect. Really cool how it came to be like that. It kind of seems perfect for your book.
Really weird.
You're always meant to write this. That's incredible, actually. It's a good thing you chose that title, not the other one, too. That being said, I'm wondering, well, first off, everybody, we're going to put the link to that in the description box of this podcast today. So when we're finished, go ahead and click on over, check it out, and be sure to purchase the book also. It could be found on Amazon, I know. Anywhere else, Nicola?
Yeah, all the main online bookstores, I think. Barnes & Noble in Great Britain, Waterstones, Blackwell's. It's not difficult to find the book. My name and The Unspeakable, and it pops up.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy.
Great. So that being said, everybody, Nicole, I'm wondering, you spent so long writing this book. What's next? You have the book out. It's doing great. What's on the horizon for you? Anything exciting to think about?
Well, my grandparents were wonderful grandparents, and that comes over in the book. So I've got 3 grandchildren. So my aim at the moment is to be as wonderful a grandparent as my grandparents were. So that's one part of my life. But I'm still not on top of the resonance, that the communication that's been going on, people reaching out to me. So I'm still sort of juggling the launch of the Unspeakable, sending books out, following up invitations to talk, to read, to do this, that, and the other. So I'm just swimming a bit in everything at the moment, but that's fine. It will resolve. But I'm not going to write any more books. I've told myself that's enough now.
Got it. Well, hey, that's how, how it all comes to be. And I'm excited to, stay up to date there through the website and everything else. So we'll see, And I'm wondering if there's any other tidbits, any writing tips, anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we sign off today. What can we leave everybody listening with?
Follow your heart. If you want to write a book, write that book, but be kind to yourself while you're setting out on the path to writing a book. It is a long haul, but it's so satisfying when you get there and you hold your book in your hand for the first time. It's a great sense of accomplishment, I think.
Definitely. And, you're the perfect example of all of this. No matter how long it takes, if you're doing it carefully, correctly, putting all of your heart into it, it'll come to be. And for you in this case, The Unspeakable is just a beautiful book, personal stories and research combined, and just an incredible way to share the stories of those who weren't able to speak of them before.
Mm-hmm. So they've got their identity back, the 5 people that I researched, and that was probably the main reason why I wanted to write the book.
Yeah, and it's beautiful and so important that you did that. That's incredible.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this today. It's been a true pleasure speaking with you and learning about your story. And I wish you all the best. And to all of our listeners today, I think that Nicola's story really just reminds us that family history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding who we are and choosing how we move forward and honoring that past as well. And so thank you so much, Nicola. It's been a pleasure having you on today.
Well, thank you for your lovely questions and your attention and your time.
Always, of course. And with such a powerful book like this story has to be shared. And to all of our listeners, your story also matters. Your family's silence might be protecting something that needs to be honored, not hidden, just like this story. You never know. Go out and talk to your family members. See what there is to be shared. You too can discover a story to be told as well. And also just remember, the most important mission that we have as authors is to simply listen to the whispers of the past, to the weight of silence, to the courage it takes to speak the unspeakable. So please go ahead, again, check out the Unspeakable wherever you can find it. Head over to Nicola's website. And until next time, everybody, keep seeking truth, keep honoring complexity, and remember that every family story is also a human story. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Authors on Mission podcast.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.